My fiancée disappeared on our wedding day and sent me a message saying she doesn't love me anymore.
Hey Reddit, I'm Adam, 31, and I'm trying to put together the pieces of my life after something I never thought would happen. A few weeks ago, I was supposed to get married to the love of my life, Emily, 29. We had been together for nearly 5 years, and everything was in place for our wedding day. The venue was perfect, our family and friends were there, and I was standing at the altar, waiting for her. But she never showed up. She disappeared, and hours later, when I finally heard from her, it wasn't the explanation I was hoping for. Instead, she sent me a message, one that shattered my heart completely.
She said she didn't love me anymore.
This is the story of how everything I thought I knew about my future fell apart, and how I'm struggling to make sense of the wreckage. Here's what happened. To start, I need to go back to how we met because, honestly, it feels like a different lifetime now. I met Emily in the summer of 2018, a year after I moved to Chicago for my job. I had just started working at an advertising agency, and I was still trying to get used to the city's pace. I had been in a relationship before moving, but that ended pretty quickly once the long-distance reality set in. I wasn't looking for anything serious at the time, mostly because I was focused on adjusting to my new life.
Emily worked in the same building but for a different company.
She was a graphic designer, and while our paths didn't cross directly for work, I would sometimes see her in the lobby or at the coffee shop across the street. There was something magnetic about her energy. She had this vibrant, almost effortless style, her brown hair often tied back messily, always wearing these colorful, quirky outfits that somehow seemed perfectly put together. She was the kind of person who would talk to strangers at the coffee shop or compliment someone's shoes in the elevator, and it would feel totally natural. At the time, I admired her from afar but never had the nerve to approach her. I was, to put it simply, intimidated by her confidence. She just had this aura of being completely comfortable in her own skin, and I felt like an awkward mess in comparison. Then one evening, after a long week of work, there was a happy hour event hosted by a friend of mine, Ryan, who also worked in the same building. I didn't really feel like going, I was exhausted and ready to go home and crash on my couch. But Ryan convinced me, saying it would be fun, and besides, I hadn't gone out in a while. So, I reluctantly agreed. Little did I know that decision would change my life. When I arrived at the bar, I saw Emily standing with a group of people. She was laughing, her eyes bright, and I couldn't help but stare. I remember Ryan nudging me, whispering, "Man, you've been looking at her for months. Just go talk to her." I almost chickened out, but something in me, maybe it was the couple of beers I'd already had, pushed me to approach her.
I don't remember exactly what I said.
I think I made some joke about how we always ended up at the same coffee shop and how I should have introduced myself sooner.
She laughed, and that was all it took. For the rest of the night, we were inseparable.
We talked about everything: our jobs, our families, our favorite music, movies, and, of course, Chicago. She had moved here a few years earlier and already knew all the cool spots in the city, promising to take me to her favorite hole-in-the-wall pizza joint, which, to this day, is still the best pizza I've ever had. By the end of the night, we exchanged numbers, and I couldn't stop smiling the entire way home. I remember texting Ryan later that night, saying, "I think I just met someone incredible."
After that night, things moved quickly between us.
I thought we'd play it cool, take things slow, but it was like there was this undeniable connection between us.
It felt easy and natural.
Within a week, we were texting nonstop, and by the next weekend, we had our first date, a long, leisurely brunch that lasted well into the afternoon. Emily had this way of making even the simplest things feel special. Whether we were walking through the park or grabbing coffee, she had a contagious energy that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. There's one particular night that stands out in my memory, maybe because it was when I first realized I was falling in love with her. It was a chilly autumn evening, and we decided to go for a walk along Lake Michigan. The city was beautiful that night, the skyline lit up against the dark sky, the cool breeze coming off the water. We talked about our childhoods, our families. I learned that Emily had a complicated relationship with her parents, particularly her mother, who she described as distant and overly critical. Despite that, she was fiercely independent and driven. We walked for hours, and I remember thinking how comfortable I felt around her, like I didn't have to pretend to be someone else. When we finally made our way back to my apartment, I invited her up for a drink. I wasn't expecting anything more than to continue our conversation, but as we sat on my couch, laughing and sharing stories, she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't the kiss itself that struck me, though. It was the way she looked at me afterward, like she was seeing me for the first time. In that moment, I felt a connection so deep it almost scared me. I knew I was falling for her, hard and fast. After that, we were inseparable. We spent weekends exploring new parts of the city, going to concerts, trying new restaurants, and spending quiet nights at home watching Netflix. Every moment with her felt like an adventure. She had this spontaneity that was infectious, like the time she showed up at my door with tickets to a last-minute road trip to Nashville. We drove through the night, stopping at random diners and singing along to old rock songs. It was one of the best weekends of my life. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had found someone I could see a future with. And the craziest part was, it didn't scare me, it excited me. After about a year of dating, Emily and I decided to move in together. It felt like the logical next step. We were practically living together anyway, with me spending most nights at her place or her crashing at mine. We found a cozy apartment on the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood that was quiet but still close enough to the hustle and bustle of downtown. It wasn't a big place, just a one-bedroom with a small kitchen and a tiny balcony, but it was perfect for us. Moving in together felt exciting. We spent weekends shopping for furniture, debating over which couch to buy, and arguing over things like whether or not we needed a fancy espresso machine. Spoiler, we didn't, but Emily won that battle. It felt like we were building something together, creating our own little world. For a while, everything was great. We fell into a comfortable routine of mornings spent drinking coffee on the balcony, evenings cooking dinner together, and late nights binge-watching whatever new series we were obsessed with. We made plans for the future, talking about traveling more, maybe getting a dog, and even joking about how one day, we'd buy a house in the suburbs. But like any couple, we had our challenges. Living together exposed a few cracks that hadn't been so obvious when we were just dating. I was a neat freak, I liked things in order, dishes washed, laundry folded. Emily, on the other hand, was more carefree. She'd leave her clothes scattered on the floor or forget to clean up after cooking. At first, it didn't bother me much, but over time, it started to grate on me. There was one night in particular that stands out. I had come home late from work, exhausted and stressed, and the apartment was a mess. Dishes piled up in the sink, clothes tossed everywhere. I snapped. "Can you please clean up after yourself?" I said, sharper than I intended. "I feel like I'm always the one picking up around here." Emily looked at me, clearly taken aback by my tone. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I was going to clean it up later. "It is a big deal, Emily. I just want things to be organized." We argued for a while, both of us frustrated, but eventually, we made up. She promised to try harder, and I promised to be more patient. Looking back, though, I wonder if that was one of the first signs that something was wrong, something deeper than just household chores. By the time we hit the 3-year mark, I knew I wanted to marry Emily. Despite the occasional arguments and the stresses of life, I loved her more than anything. She was my best friend, my partner, the person I wanted to build a future with. So, I started planning the proposal. I didn't want to go over the top, it just wasn't our style. Emily wasn't the kind of person who wanted grand gestures or public proposals. She preferred things that were intimate and meaningful. So, I came up with the idea to propose during one of our weekend trips to the beach. We had been going to this little spot along Lake Michigan since we first started dating, and it had become our place. I spent weeks planning it out. I found the perfect ring, a simple yet elegant design, just like Emily. I rehearsed what I was going to say, practiced how I would ask her, and tried not to let my nerves get the best of me. The weekend of the proposal couldn't have been more perfect. The weather was gorgeous sunny, with just a slight breeze coming off the lake. We spent the day lounging on the beach, swimming, and laughing like we always did. As the sun began to set, I suggested we take a walk along the water. My heart was racing as we strolled along the shoreline, hand in hand. I knew this was the moment. When we reached a quiet spot, I stopped, turned to her, and took a deep breath. "Emily," I said, my voice shaky.
I love you more than anything. These past 3 years with you have been the best of my life, and I can't imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me?"
For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide with surprise. I could see the emotions playing across her face: shock, joy, and something else I couldn't quite place. Then, she smiled, and I could feel the tension in my chest release. "Yes," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes.
"Of course, I'll marry you."
I slipped the ring onto her finger, and we hugged, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. That night, we celebrated, talking about our future, about where we wanted to live, about the family we wanted to have.
It was one of the happiest moments of my life.
But looking back now, I wonder if I missed something in her eyes that day. Something that hinted at doubt, at uncertainty. At the time, I was too caught up in my own happiness to notice.
After the proposal, things started moving fast.
We set a date for the wedding, booked a venue, and started planning the details. Emily threw herself into the wedding planning, and for the most part, I was happy to let her take the lead. She had always been the creative one, and I trusted her to plan the wedding of our dreams.
But as the months went on, I noticed something was changing in her. She was becoming more distant, more withdrawn.
At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just wedding stress. After all, planning a wedding can be overwhelming, and Emily was juggling work, family expectations, and all the details of the big day. I tried to be supportive, to reassure her that everything would be fine.
But it wasn't just wedding stress. She started pulling away from me emotionally.
I'd come home from work, and she'd be sitting on the couch, staring at her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. When I tried to talk to her about the future, about our plans after the wedding, she'd change the subject or give me vague answers.
There was one night that stands out in my memory.
We were sitting at the kitchen table, eating dinner, and I brought up the honeymoon. I had been researching different places we could go: Italy, Greece, Hawaii. I was excited about the idea of traveling together, starting our married life with an adventure. But when I mentioned it, Emily barely responded. She just nodded, poking at her food with her fork.
"Emily, is everything okay?" I asked, concerned.
She looked up, her eyes tired.
"Yeah, I'm just tired. Work has been a lot lately." I nodded, trying to be understanding. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong.
I tried bringing it up again later that night, but she brushed it off.
"I'm fine, Adam."
"Really?"
"It's just stress." But it wasn't just stress.
I could feel her slipping away, and no matter how hard I tried to reach her, she kept pulling back. I didn't want to admit it at the time, but I think I was scared.
Scared that something deeper was going on, something I didn't understand. The morning of our wedding day felt surreal.
I woke up early, full of nervous excitement, ready to marry the woman I had spent the last 5 years with. Everything was set: the venue, the flowers, the guests. I was supposed to meet Emily at the altar, where we'd say our vows and start the rest of our lives together. But as the hours ticked by, something started to feel off.
Emily hadn't called or texted me that morning, which was strange.
We had talked the night before, both of us excited, but now there was radio silence.
At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just busy getting ready, surrounded by her bridesmaids, going through the usual wedding chaos.
But as the minutes passed, the uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger. I was at the venue, dressed and ready, standing with my best man, Ryan.
He could tell I was starting to get anxious.
"Don't worry, man," he said, clapping me on the back.
"She'll be here. It's probably just some last-minute hair or makeup thing. You know how weddings are." I nodded, trying to calm myself down.
But the clock kept ticking, and Emily still hadn't shown up.
By 3 p.m., the ceremony was supposed to start.
The guests were seated, the music was playing softly in the background, and I was standing at the altar, waiting for my bride.
But Emily wasn't there.
I tried calling her, no answer. I sent her a text, asking if everything was okay.
Still nothing. As the minutes dragged on, panic started to set in.
I could feel the eyes of our friends and family on me, the confusion and concern spreading through the crowd.
Ryan pulled me aside, his face serious.
"Have you heard from her?" he asked. I shook my head, my heart racing.
"No. I don't know what's going on."
We tried calling her again, but it went straight to voicemail. By 3:30, I knew something was very wrong. My stomach was in knots, my hands trembling as I checked my phone every few seconds, hoping for some kind of message, some kind of explanation. By 4 p.m., it was clear that Emily wasn't coming. And then, at 4:15, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. I'll never forget the moment I opened that message. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest as I unlocked my phone and saw her name on the screen. I had been waiting for hours to hear from her, hoping for some kind of explanation, something that would make sense of why she hadn't shown up. But when I read the message, it wasn't at all what I had expected.
"I'm sorry, Adam. I can't do this. I don't love you anymore." That was it.
One simple sentence, and my entire world fell apart. I stood there, staring at the screen, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just read.
How could she say that? How could she not love me anymore?
We had been together for 5 years. We had planned a life together, a future.
We were supposed to be getting married right now.
I tried calling her, desperate for answers, but she didn't pick up. I sent her a message, begging her to talk to me, to explain what was going on. But there was no response.
It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had planned, was gone. I was supposed to be celebrating the happiest day of my life, but instead, I was standing there, holding my phone, staring at a message that had shattered my heart. Ryan saw the look on my face and pulled me aside.
"What did she say?" he asked, his voice quiet, filled with concern. I showed him the message, and I could see the shock and disbelief in his eyes.
"Jesus, man," he muttered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to process what was happening. All I knew was that Emily was gone, and the life I thought we were going to build together was over." After the message, everything became a blur. Ryan helped me break the news to the guests.
I don't even remember what was said, it was all a fog of confusion, disbelief, and heartbreak. People came up to me, offering their sympathy, their apologies, but none of it made a difference. All I could think about was Emily and why she had done this to me. My family was there, of course, and they were devastated. My mom, who had always loved Emily like a daughter, couldn't believe it. She kept asking me what had gone wrong, what could have possibly made Emily change her mind like that.
But I didn't have any answers.
I didn't know why she had left. I didn't know why she had waited until the wedding day to tell me she didn't love me anymore. After the guests left, I was left standing in the empty venue, staring at the altar where we were supposed to have been married. It felt surreal, like I was in the middle of a nightmare and couldn't wake up. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something, but I felt numb.
Completely and utterly numb. Ryan stayed with me that night. He tried to talk to me, to get me to open up, but I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. Emily was gone, and I had no idea where she was or why she had done this. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I spent hours replaying everything in my head, searching for the signs I had missed, the moments when I should have realized something was wrong. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of it. In the days that followed, I had to start telling people what had happened. It was humiliating, explaining that my fiancée had left me at the altar, that she had sent me a message saying she didn't love me anymore. My family was in shock. My mom kept asking if I had heard from her, if she had given me any kind of explanation. My dad, who's not the most emotional guy, just shook his head and said, "You deserve better, Adam." But those words didn't bring me any comfort. I didn't want better. I wanted Emily. I wanted the life we were supposed to have. My friends were equally shocked. Ryan had been there, of course, but telling the rest of our friends was just as painful. Every time I explained what had happened, I felt like I was reliving the moment all over again.
The looks of pity, the awkward silences, it was like salt in the wound. I remember telling my best friend, Greg. We were sitting at a bar, and I had barely touched my drink. Greg looked at me, his brow furrowed with concern.
Man, I don't even know what to say. It's messed up. I nodded, my throat tight.
Yeah, it is. Greg leaned back in his chair, shaking his head.
You didn't deserve this, Adam.
You gave her everything. I don't get how she could just leave like that.
I didn't get it either. I had done everything right, hadn't I?
I had loved her, supported her, built a life with her.
And still, it wasn't enough.
In the weeks after the wedding, I tried reaching out to Emily several times, desperate for some kind of explanation. I texted her, called her, even went by her apartment once, but she wasn't there. It felt like she had completely disappeared from my life. I spent so many nights replaying our relationship in my head, trying to piece together what had gone wrong.
Had I missed the signs? Was she unhappy and I just didn't see it?
I thought back to the moments when she had seemed distant, when she had pulled away from me emotionally.
But none of it made sense.
How could she have said yes to my proposal, planned a wedding with me, only to leave me at the altar and tell me she didn't love me anymore?
I started questioning everything about myself. Was I not good enough? Had I pushed her away without realizing it?
The self-doubt gnawed at me, eating away at my confidence, my sense of who I was. I had always prided myself on being a good partner, but now, I wasn't sure anymore.
Maybe I had missed something.
Maybe there was something fundamentally wrong with me that had made her fall out of love. I couldn't stop thinking about all the little moments we had shared, the weekends we spent together, the late-night conversations, the times we laughed so hard we cried.
How could all of that have meant nothing to her? How could she have just walked away?
It was like I was stuck in this endless loop of questions and doubts, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't find any answers.
After a couple of months of spiraling, my family convinced me to see a therapist. At first, I didn't think it would help.
I wasn't sure how talking to a stranger was going to fix the hole in my heart.
But eventually, I realized I couldn't keep going like this.
I couldn't keep torturing myself with the what-ifs and the why didn't I-s. I started seeing Dr. Palmer, a therapist my sister recommended. The first few sessions were tough. I didn't know how to open up, didn't know how to articulate the pain I was feeling. But Dr. Palmer was patient, and little by little, I began to unravel the layers of grief and heartbreak I had been carrying. One of the first things Dr. Palmer helped me realize was that Emily's decision to leave wasn't about me. It was about her, her own fears, her own insecurities, her own doubts. She had made the choice to walk away, and that choice wasn't a reflection of my worth. I couldn't have changed what happened, no matter how hard I had tried. It was a hard truth to accept, but over time, I started to understand it. Emily had her reasons for leaving, and whether or not I agreed with them, they were her choices to make. I couldn't control her actions, and I couldn't blame myself for something I had no power over. Therapy also helped me see that my self-worth wasn't tied to Emily's love or lack thereof. For months, I had been beating myself up, wondering if I wasn't good enough, if I had somehow failed. But Dr. Palmer helped me see that I was enough. Just because Emily had walked away didn't mean I was unlovable.
It didn't mean there was something wrong with me.
But healing was a slow process. There were still days when the weight of the heartbreak felt unbearable, when I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the life we were supposed to have. There were still nights when I lay awake, wondering where she was, what she was doing, and why she had chosen to leave me like that. As the months went by, I slowly began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the pain felt overwhelming, but I was starting to find my way forward. I began focusing on my job, throwing myself into work as a way to distract myself from the constant thoughts of Emily. I started taking on new projects, working long hours, and even got promoted to a managerial position. It felt good to have something else to focus on, something I could control. I also started reconnecting with friends, people I had distanced myself from during the last few months of the relationship. I hadn't realized how much I had isolated myself while trying to build a life with Emily, but now, I was making an effort to reach out, to spend time with the people who cared about me. There was one weekend in particular that stood out. Ryan, Greg, and a few of our other friends convinced me to take a trip up to a cabin in the woods. It was the first time in months that I had allowed myself to just let go. We spent the weekend hiking, playing cards, sitting around a campfire, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't that the pain had disappeared, it was still there, lurking in the background, but I was starting to realize that there was life beyond the heartbreak. I also started picking up hobbies that I had neglected during the relationship. I went back to the gym, started playing basketball with some coworkers, and even took up photography, something I had always been interested in but never had the time for. These little things helped me rediscover parts of myself that I had lost while trying to build a life around Emily. Slowly but surely, I was starting to feel like myself again. It's been over a year since that fateful day, and while I'm not going to pretend that everything is perfect, I'm in a much better place than I was before. The pain of what happened hasn't completely disappeared, but it no longer controls me. I've learned how to cope, how to move forward, and how to rebuild my life without Emily in it. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that healing isn't a straight line. There are still moments when I think about her, when I wonder what could have been if things had turned out differently. But those moments are fewer and farther between now, and when they do come, I've learned how to handle them. I've started dating again, though I've been taking it slow. At first, I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I couldn't let what happened with Emily define my future. I've gone on a few dates, met some nice women, and while nothing has turned into a serious relationship yet, I'm open to the possibility of love again. But more than anything, I've learned to be okay with being on my own. For so long, my identity was wrapped up in my relationship with Emily, in the future we were supposed to have together. But now, I'm learning to define myself outside of that. I'm focusing on my career, my friendships, and my own personal growth. I've started traveling more, something I had always wanted to do but had put off while we were together. There are still moments when I think about her, when I wonder where she is, what she's doing, and why she left. But I've come to realize that some things aren't meant to be, and that's okay. I can't change what happened, but I can choose how I move forward. So that's my story, Reddit. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that even when your world falls apart, you can still find a way to rebuild. It's not easy, and the pain doesn't disappear overnight. But little by little, you can find yourself again. And sometimes, that's enough.